I am going to challenge you to do something here. I asked my audience about weight loss and asked them for their 15 most popular questions that are currently unanswered for them
All right.
about weight loss. The first one was, how do I lose weight fast?
Ha! So essentially you can engage what could be classified as a protein-sparing modified fast. You're basically crash dieting. I don't love doing that though, honestly.
Listen, I've got a wedding. I need to lose weight fast. How do I lose weight fast?
Losing weight fast. So you would basically do an aggressive caloric deficit. So anywhere, I would say 20% below your maintenance needs, 20 to possibly 40, depending on the individual, percent below your maintenance needs. And then keep the protein high. And this is going to default you to relatively low carbohydrate, relatively low fat, and just train regularly. Don't hurt yourself.
Protein high, you said?
Yeah, protein high and calories wise. So for example, if you maintained at, we'll just take a round number, 2,000 calories. So you would just lop off about a third of that and then just go and see if you can maintain your fat loss while maintaining strength levels relatively. It's almost inevitable to crash diet and lose some strength in the process. But I mean, we're talking about something that's not an optimal process. But yeah, that's the game. Basically, aggressive caloric deficit, keep protein very high. And then you just go. And the deficit could be anywhere from 500 to 1,000-ish calories below what you normally take in.
The second one is, why do I regain weight after stopping Ozempic, Wegovy, etc.?
All right, so those GLP-1 RAs, the GLP-1 receptor agonist drugs like Wegovy, they have at least 3 different mechanisms that all converge towards almost nullifying your hunger and your appetite response. And so when you cut out the drug, then your normal appetite comes back. And an unfortunate reality for a lot of GLP-1 users when they get off the drug is they just don't have the habits and they don't have the skills necessarily to maintain their weight loss. And of course, once again, they're fighting their appetite. So I would say perhaps try a weaning off process instead of just a jumping off process. A weaning off process where you are reinforcing countermeasures to overeating, where you are reinforcing good training habits and good dietary habits, and where you're also progressively learning how to live with and deal with sensations of hunger between meals and just train those habits in. And it can be done. I'm not one of the people in the camp who says it's impossible to get off of weight loss drugs successfully.
So number 3 again is my metabolism damaged after dieting? And they're asking a question here about something called adaptive thermogenesis.
Yeah. Okay. So this is not really a short shot here.
Okay.
So the process of metabolic adaptation is kind of complex. And it happens in both directions, whether you try to gain weight or whether you try to lose weight. So earlier we talked about an increase in non-exercise activity thermogenesis, or NEAT, an increase in NEAT in response to an increase in calories. So that occurs. And across studies, I gave an example that showed a 336 calorie increase in NEAT when 1,000 calories were stacked on top of people's maintenance. But there are other studies where the caloric increase was not quite that aggressive. And so on average, increases in NEAT, or non-exercise activity thermogenesis, are about 200 to 300 calories. So you increase your energy expenditure about 200 to 300 calories if you're overeating.
Yeah. So your body will start to twitch more and move more, burning more non-active calories.
That's correct.
When you're overeating, yeah? So
Now,
that's an adaptation.
That's the adaptation in the caloric surplus side. So in the caloric deficit side, it's just the opposite thing, just the mirror of it. So people decrease their non-exercise activity thermogenesis, or their NEAT. They decrease it on average like 2 to 3-ish hundred calories as a result of dieting. So this is part of a metabolic adaptation that occurs with dieting.
Is this why people don't think the calories in, calories out system is working for them sometimes? Because they don't realize that if they're in a calorie deficit sometimes, they are subconsciously moving around less, which means that they're burning less calories. So actually, they're not in a calorie deficit.
Yes, that's correct. So with the dieting side of things, which is much more of a public health issue, weight loss is much more of a necessity than the weight gain. It's tougher for most people because in addition to the decrease in non-exercise activity, that'll cost people 200 to 300-ish calories that they're no longer burning at the end of the dieting cycle. Then you've got what's called adaptive thermoreduction. Okay, so you mentioned adaptive thermogenesis. Technically, that is there's non-shivering adaptive thermogenesis and there's shivering adaptive thermogenesis, but that all has to do with increases in energy expenditure in response to cold environments. So that's what adaptive thermogenesis is. It's the increase in energy expenditure. When people diet, there's something called adaptive thermoreduction. And that is that part of it is a decrease in non-exercise activity thermogenesis.
You're basically saying that the body changes when we're in a calorie deficit. It stops doing as much.
Yes, that's the activity part.
Yeah.
But then there's also the metabolic part. So we've got a decrease in non-exercise activity.
Yeah.
Then we have adaptive thermoreduction, which has to do with a metabolic component that has to do with the sympathetic nervous system and also potentially thyroid output as well. So there's this metabolic change that goes on, and there's behavioral or activity change that goes on.
So when people say I've got a slow metabolism, they might be telling the truth.
When people say I have a slow metabolism, what's usually happening is they have a pretty massive drop in NEAT or non-exercise activity to the order of 200 to 300 calories. Now, adaptive thermoreduction is another 50 to 100 calories.
Okay.
So we're looking at in the neighborhood of like possibly 300-400 calories that they're no longer burning as a result of the dieting process. Now, if you take somebody with clinically diagnosed hypothyroidism, then their resting metabolic rate could be 7 to 10% lower than somebody without a thyroid issue. So you add another 100 to 200 calories less burned over here, then you have the potential for 500 to 600 calories of energy expenditure that this person is challenged with at the end of their dieting cycle. So
I guess it is kind of true in a way that people understand it, that if you overeat, your metabolism, as far as they understand what their metabolism is increasing. And if you undereat, then your metabolism is slowing down.
Yes, but I have to emphasize the major component that slows down is your non-exercise activity.
You're not moving around as much.
Yes. The other components, like adaptive thermoreduction and potential thyroid issues, that is the minor component. The major component is a drop in fidgeting, a slowing of the rate that you walk around, an increase in the amount you sit around.
And you can control that?
Yes. It's hard to put a finger on it, but as long as you know that stuff goes down. I'll give you an example of physique competitors. They are, as their cutting phase progresses, they're literally lying around in between their cardio sessions and their resistance training sessions and their Tupperware meal sessions. Okay, they're no longer tapping their heads, tapping their fingers and bobbing their heads, and they no longer have a pep in their step. They're no longer doing non-exercise activities, basically.
Question 4. What diet actually works best for long-term weight loss? Keto, low-fat, Mediterranean, intermittent fasting, and you've got to give me a answer here.
I'll say it in one sentence. The diet with enough protein, enough total calories, that is comprised predominantly of healthy food choices, that fits the individual's personal preferences and tolerances.
How do I lose belly fat specifically? Can you target the belly?
Targeting belly fat specifically is a matter of targeting total body fat. You can't necessarily spot reduce the belly fat. Now, if we're to go a layer deeper, it is possible for certain diets to be more conducive to preventing visceral fat gain, or maybe even accelerating visceral fat loss. Visceral fat is the fat within the abdominal cavity around the organs. And so it is possible for certain diets to be more conducive to reductions in visceral fat. And that would be diets that have a lower proportion of saturated fat.
What's an example of a saturated fat food?
Fatty land animal meats. So land animal fats are going to be your saturated fats that are more conducive to visceral fat gain. So if you were to switch out, let's say, fatty cuts of meat, just trim that fat out. And if you replaced it with something like avocado nuts, olive oil, seeds.
On menopause, why is fat loss harder and what actually works?
Okay. During the menopausal transition, which begins at a woman's mid-40s on average and then ends in the mid-50s, there are changes physiologically and hormonally that can challenge a fitness program. So it can challenge their ability to execute the fitness program and adhere to it. And so things like hot flashes and joint pain, changes in sexual function, and poor sleep, all of those things can converge to lead to a decreased ability to stick to a program and do the necessary physical activity and dietary adherence to reach the sort of the standard rate of progress for body composition change. And so the solution to that would be simply, you don't have to rearrange a whole program because somebody's going through menopause. You don't have to cut out nutrients and do any special things. What has been effective is just lowering the expectation of progress. So whereas I would typically have somebody gun for a pound a week of fat loss, somebody in the menopausal transition, they have more challenges to that going on simultaneously. So we would go for about half of that.
Protein? What do they do in terms of protein? Just keep the protein high?
Same range, yeah. So with protein, I gotta say, there's sort of a two-tiered recommendation. So the general public with average goals will do just fine on 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight. That's kind of like the general population average goal, folks. Somebody like yourself, somebody like me, and folks who are oriented towards maybe pushing the envelope a little bit more than the average, 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight. And, you know, there's a little margin over here for people on the fringe, physique competitors, who I would have no problem seeing them go higher than that 2.2 grams per kilogram cutoff.
Is there anything else that peri or menopausal women need to understand about gaining muscle and keeping fat off when they're going through menopause? Is there anything else that we've missed?
You know, I would just emphasize the understanding that midlife presents maybe the highest point of psychological stress in people's lives. So starting from the late 40s, going all the way into people's 50s and 60s, it's like that. You know, the concentrated period in the menopausal transition, mid-40s to mid-50s, is when people are dealing with ailing parents, the stress of ailing parents, the stress of kids going through high school or college, the stress of hitting a high point in their careers, the pressures thereof, the time and the energy that is necessary to allocate for all of those things. All of those things distract from, oh, I've got a fitness program here. Oh, my coach is making me do this and this and this, and now he's making me diet like this. That's the thing that I would emphasize. There's nothing special or different that needs to be done. And in fact, there's a lot of mythology that's circulating the space right now where coaches and gurus and even some physicians are telling women that they are just doomed to gain a bunch of belly fat and lose a bunch of muscle during menopause. It just happens. You're doomed. Well, that's just not true. There is a study called the SWAN study. That's the longest and largest study of its kind. And the average amount of fat gain during the entire menopausal transition was 1.6 kilograms, which is 3.5 pounds. And the average amount of muscle loss total during the menopausal transition was 0.2 kilograms. That's about half a pound of muscle loss. Statistically significant? Yes. Insurmountable? No. So, and are there going to be outliers who experience double the muscle loss and double the fat gain of that? Yes. But none of this is insurmountable.
If you love the Diary of a CEO brand and you watch this channel, please do me a huge favor. Become part of the 15% of the viewers on this channel that have hit the subscribe button. It helps us tremendously, and the bigger the channel gets, the bigger the guests.